I was working as a graphic designer last year when I stumbled on an old news article that made me throw up in my bathroom. But let me start from the beginning. 3 years ago, I was 22 and living in this old Victorian house in Baltimore that had been converted into 4 apartments. My neighbor Claire lived right across the hall from me on the 2nd floor, and we clicked almost immediately after I moved in. She was 23, lived with her parents and her grandmother, who technically owned their unit. The grandmother, Eleanor, was a small, calm, 78-year-old who always sat on the shared porch when the weather was decent. She would tell me how the house had been built in the 1920s, how she had raised her kids there, how the neighborhood used to be safer and cheaper. She remembered birthdays, asked about my job, and insisted I call her Ellie instead of anything formal. She felt like the stable center of that whole family, the one person who was never in a rush. Claire and I ended up spending a lot of time together. We would go to the farmer's market on Saturdays, split groceries, watch shows on my old TV, trade paperbacks. We texted constantly about dates and annoying coworkers. Her parents, Frank and Susan, were polite but always looked exhausted, like they were permanently paying for something. One night over cheap wine, Claire mentioned they had huge medical debts from Eleanor's heart surgeries over the past 2 years. Even after insurance, it was tens of thousands, plus the mortgage and old credit cards. She said once, in this flat voice, that if her grandmother died, they would inherit the apartment and the debt. Then she forced a laugh and changed the subject. Back then, I just filed it under adult problems I could not fix. Everyone I knew was stressed about money, so her family did not seem unusual, except for how tense her parents got about Eleanor's health. Through the thin walls, I would hear low arguments about co-pays and which doctor they could afford. And once I heard Susan say that Eleanor could not keep going back to the hospital because they did not have it. Then, last January, Claire told me her grandmother had gotten really sick again, and the doctors said she needed rest in a quiet room, so they decided to use the small back room that faced the rear staircase, the one with the unused attic entrance, as Eleanor's new bedroom. After that, Eleanor disappeared from the porch. 1 week she was out in her shawl, gossiping about another tenant. The next week her chair stayed empty. When I asked how she was, Claire said her grandmother was very weak and not leaving the bed. I offered to bring soup and visit. Susan appeared behind her with a polite, tight smile and said Eleanor did not want guests seeing her like that she was embarrassed about her condition. I let it go. A couple of weeks later, I noticed a smell in the hallway, hitting me as soon as I opened my door. Heavy, sweet, chemical, like too much air freshener sprayed over something else. It was not normal cooking or trash. When I mentioned it, Claire said her mom had bought new air fresheners for her grandmother because she hated the hospital medicine smell. Inside their place, there were candles on tables, plug-in air fresheners in several outlets, and Susan was mopping with strong bleach. She joked she was trying to kill every germ in Baltimore. Under the mix of vanilla and cleaner, there was another odor that made my stomach twist. I left earlier than I planned and tried to convince myself I was being dramatic. My mom came to visit in February, about a month after they had moved Eleanor to that back room. Mom had worked as a nurse in a hospital morgue for almost 20 years, so she is used to bad smells. We were walking up the stairs with her suitcase when Claire's door opened, and Susan came out carrying a bag of candles and a big refill bottle for a plug-in. They exchanged quick hellos. I introduced them. Susan said Eleanor was hanging in there, and then she left. The moment I closed my door, my mom's expression changed. She set her bag down and asked how long Claire's grandmother had been sick and out of sight. I said about a month, that they had made a quiet room in the back. Mom frowned and said she did not want to scare me, but the smell in the hallway was not just air fresheners. Under the vanilla and cinnamon, she could smell decomposition, the same thing they tried to hide when families came to identify bodies at the morgue. I told her she was wrong, that Eleanor was just very ill and bedridden, that Susan was anxious and overdoing it with cleaning. Mom stayed calm and said that once you know that smell, you do not forget it, then change the subject. The next morning over coffee, she brought it up again more gently, saying that even if we were wrong, there was no harm in someone checking on an elderly woman nobody had seen in weeks. I said I did not want to accuse my neighbors of anything or destroy my friendship with Claire over a smell. Mom told me I did not have to be involved at all, that she could call anonymously if it kept her from wondering whether someone was being neglected or worse. After she went home that afternoon, I sat in my apartment, catching the faint sweetness from the hallway and hearing Claire's TV through the wall, trying not to picture that back room. The next day, Mom made an anonymous call to social services, asking them to do a wellness check on an elderly woman at our address. 3 days later, I came home and saw Claire's apartment door wide open. Inside, the place was empty. No couch, no TV, no pictures, not even the mat by the door. The only thing left was the strong bleach smell with that same sweet note underneath. I went downstairs to the landlord. He said the family had moved out late the night before, paid the fee for breaking the lease, signed the papers, handed over the keys. They mentioned a job transfer and family issues. When I asked where they'd gone, he shrugged and said he didn't know. Back in my place, I called Claire, and it went straight to voicemail. I sent a couple of texts asking what was going on. Nothing came back. When I checked her social media, every profile I knew was gone. It didn't feel like moving. It felt like they had wiped themselves out. About a week later, I heard heavy steps on the stairs in the middle of the day. I checked the peephole and saw 2 cops and 2 people in plain clothes with clipboards. They talked briefly with the landlord, then went to the locked door leading to the back staircase. One of them pried the lock off with a bar, and they went up with flashlights. I stood in my doorway pretending to sort mail. When they came down, one of the plainclothes workers took notes while talking to the landlord. Then they all left. Later, the landlord told me it was police and social services doing a wellness check on an elderly person. He said the apartment and that rear room were completely empty. No furniture, no personal items, nothing to show who had lived there. With no one inside and no body, he said, there was nothing else they could do. After that, I tried to push it out of my head. I told myself my mom had been wrong about the smell and that Claire's family had panicked about money and left without saying goodbye. A new tenant moved into their unit. Eleanor's porch chair disappeared, and I finished my lease and moved to another part of the city. 3 years went by. Last summer, I was at work pulling reference images for a client who wanted an ad campaign that looked like old local newspapers, so I was scrolling through Baltimore news archives online. A headline in the sidebar caught my eye. Family accused of Social Security fraud after body discovery. I opened it. The article said a Baltimore family had hidden an elderly relative's death for about 3 months while they kept collecting her pension and Social Security benefits, and that the body was found after an anonymous tip about a possible unattended death at a private address. By the time authorities got there, the family had already left. Then I saw the address and everything in me locked up. It was my old building, same number, same floor. I shut my laptop, ran to the bathroom, and threw up. Sitting on the edge of the tub afterward, I started connecting every piece I had pushed away. Eleanor must have died that winter, before they told me she needed quiet in that back room. Her body was probably in there for months while I sat a few feet away, drinking coffee with Claire. The cold slowed the decomposition, and they tried to cover the rest with candles, plug-ins, and bleach because they were drowning in medical debt and couldn't afford to lose her money. My mom's call almost had to be the anonymous tip. Maybe Susan or Frank noticed how she reacted to the smell in the hallway, or panicked when the landlord mentioned questions and decided to run before the wellness check. Now, whenever I smell vanilla, my stomach flips and my brain jumps straight back to that house. I can't stop thinking, Did Claire know? Did she live in that apartment knowing her own grandmother's body was behind that locked door and smile at me every morning while bringing me croissants? My father killed a man on Tuesday, and I helped him without even knowing it. I'm not saying that to sound tough. I mean it in the most boring way possible. I held a pen, signed a line, carried a container. I'm 26, my name is Diego, and I work in my father's diner, Casa Morales, in Phoenix. Not officially. I came from Mexico 5 years ago on a tourist visa and never left. Father pays me cash. I sleep in the small room above the kitchen, and I stay away from anything in uniform. My whole life fits between the alley, the dining room, and that bed. Tuesday morning was routine. I went down at 6, made coffee, turned on the grill. Father was already by the prep table, eyes tired, jaw tight. Without a word, he slid the order book over and tapped a spot. Sign, Collins Delivery. That was normal. For regulars, we sign the receipt page so the delivery driver doesn't wait. I didn't read the line, just scribbled my name like I'd done hundreds of times. The takeout container was already closed and taped. I grabbed it, grabbed the keys, didn't ask what was in it. Mr. Collins lived about 10 minutes away on the edge of the city. I'd been to his place so often I could drive there half asleep. He was 68, retired, alone. Ordered from us 3 times a week for 2 years. Always chicken enchiladas. Always no peanuts in big letters. The allergy was serious. He told me once he almost died from a sauce in another restaurant. If I ever get the wrong food again, that's it for me, he said, half joking. On Tuesday, he opened the door in his usual cardigan and slippers, smiled, asked how business was. I handed him the bag. He paid, tipped $5 like always, and told me to say hello to my father. Nothing weird. No feeling in my gut. Just another delivery. I drove back, tossed the receipt on the spike, and started my shift. By 10 that night I was exhausted. Went upstairs, lay down with my clothes still on, and passed out. Next morning, Father shook me awake at 7. That alone put ice in my chest. He hates coming upstairs. He was holding his phone like it was something dirty. Collins is dead, he said in a flat voice. I thought he was joking. Then he shoved the screen in front of me. Local news. Photo of Mr. Collins on his porch. Robert Collins, 68, found dead in his home. They wrote, preliminary cause of death, heart attack. I read it twice, waiting to feel something make sense. I looked at Father. Why are you showing me this? I asked. He sat on the edge of my bed slowly, elbows on his knees. I put peanut butter in the sauce, he said. No build-up, no explanation. In a man his age, with his heart, anaphylactic shock looks like a heart attack. They won't cut him open. Why would they? Old man, bad heart, dies at home. That's it. It felt like the room tilted. I told him to stop. That wasn't funny. He didn't answer. His shoulders started shaking. The last time I saw him cry was 8 years ago at my mother's funeral. 8 years, he kept repeating. 8 years I waited for this. Every time he smiled at me. Every time he tipped. I knew the official story about my mother. She was sick. I remembered teachers at school saying they were sorry. Father smashing his hand into the wall. Now he gave me the real version in short pieces, like he couldn't stand to hold it all at once. My mother had an affair with Robert Collins. He was married, promised to leave his wife, promised to marry her. When she got pregnant and told him, he backed away, called her crazy, said she was trying to ruin his life. She went to a cheap, illegal clinic for an abortion, had complications, infections, stopped leaving the apartment. 2 months later, she swallowed a bottle of pills while father was at the diner. I was the one who found her. I'd pushed open the bedroom door, and everything in my life split into before and after. "He killed your mother," father said now, eyes red, staring straight at me. "So I killed him, and you helped me." He stood, went over to the small shelf by the door, came back with the order book. He opened it to Tuesday's page and shoved it into my hands. The line said, "No peanuts, Mr. Collins," in capital letters. Under that, clear and stupid, was my signature. "This is you," he said. "You delivered it. If anyone ever checks, they see your name, not mine." I started to say I'd go to the police anyway, that I'd tell them everything, that I didn't agree to any of this. He cut me off. He reminded me I'm illegal, no papers, no visa, no contract, no pay stubs. As far as the system is concerned, I don't exist until I'm a problem. "You walk into a station," he said quietly. "You're the foreigner who killed a citizen with food he knew was dangerous. You think they will call you a hero? They will put you in handcuffs and send you back across the border." The rest of that week, my body stayed on autopilot while my head kept looping the same movie. I took orders, carried plates, laughed with regulars, and inside I kept seeing myself opening a police station door, sitting down across from some detective, feeling my throat close, then forcing the words out anyway, telling everything about the peanuts, about father's confession, about blackmail. But what could I prove? No autopsy was ordered for Collins. His family chose a quick farewell, and 3 days later his body was cremated. There is nothing left to examine now. No sauce sample, no body. My signature in the order book is real, and father's alibi in the kitchen is real too, backed by 2 waitresses. If anyone checks cameras or talks to staff, all they see is me leaving with the container and returning empty-handed while he stays in view. On paper, it looks like I handled everything, and he never left the stove. I keep imagining myself going to the police and sitting down in front of some detective. Then he asks for my ID, my social, proof I work there, and the whole thing collapses. I have no papers, no lawyer, no money, nothing official to protect me. Best case, I get deported. Worst case, they say I killed Collins and I'm trying to blame my father. There's another reason I stay quiet, and I hate admitting it. I hated Robert Collins too. For 2 years he smiled at me, tipped me, asked about my life like he cared. Now all I see is the man who refused my mother when she got pregnant and walked away clean. I was 18 when she died, just out of high school. I came home, found the bathroom door locked, and got no answer when I knocked. I forced the door open and found her on the floor with empty pill bottles beside her. Nobody talked about the affair, the abortion at some illegal clinic, or the man who wanted her problem to disappear. So yes, my father is a murderer. But Collins wasn't innocent either. 2 months have passed since that Tuesday. Police closed his death as natural causes and never looked back. I keep working at the diner. I move around my father during shifts, passing plates and tickets, but I avoid his eyes whenever I can. He doesn't talk about what he did. I don't bring it up either. Between us, there's a wall made from that one night and every lie we tell by staying quiet. At night, I lie awake and replay that Tuesday morning in my head. If I had read the order properly, if I had asked why the container was already taped shut, if I had refused to deliver and told him to send someone else. He waited 8 years after my mother died. If it hadn't been me, it would have been another way. Knowing that doesn't help. The truth is, I'm an accomplice to murder now, whether I meant to be or not. My name under that no peanuts line is proof. My illegal status is my father's insurance that I'll keep quiet, because opening my mouth risks prison or a one-way trip out of the country. When I think about Collins, I never feel just one thing. Part of me remembers my mother in that bathroom and feels satisfaction that he finally paid for something. Part of me sees myself handing over the container and feels like I'm the one who killed him. I don't know if that makes me like my father, or worse, because I know the truth and still stand next to him at the grill every day. The only real change is that now I read every delivery ticket twice, check every allergy note, open containers if anything looks off, and I never sign a page without knowing what's on it. But that doesn't matter anymore. I already signed the one that mattered. Three days after I started volunteering at the dog shelter, someone sent me a photo of myself sleeping in my own bed. I lived on the 3rd floor with locked windows, and I had no idea who took it or how they got inside. That was the first time I felt something was seriously wrong, but I didn't connect it to the girl I'd just met at the shelter until much later. Let me back up. In September, I signed up to volunteer at a rescue shelter on the outskirts of Portland because I needed community service hours for my vet school application. On my first shift, I noticed this dark-haired girl around my age working in the puppy section. She introduced herself as Haley and said she'd just started too. The whole time we were cleaning kennels and feeding the dogs, I kept catching her staring at me. Not at the puppies, just directly at me. When I asked if everything was okay, she turned away fast and mumbled something about being tired. At the end of the shift, she asked for my Instagram to stay in touch about scheduling, and I gave it to her without thinking twice. Looking back, that was my first mistake. The night before that photo, I'd crashed early after a double shift, dead tired, the kind of sleep where you don't move. The next afternoon, I was sitting at my tiny kitchen table eating leftover pasta when a text came from an unknown number. No message, just an image. I opened it, and my stomach dropped. It was me, in my bed, covers pulled to my chest, hair spread on the pillow. The angle was from the foot of the bed, a little low, like someone had been standing or crouching there. There was no flash glare, no blur, and it looked too recent to be some old picture from social media. The timestamp said 3:12 a.m. that same night. I remember pushing my chair back so hard it scraped. I checked the apartment, deadbolt, chain, bathroom, closet. The windows were still locked from the inside. Nothing was moved, nothing missing. My old roommate had turned in her keys when she moved out, and I hadn't given a copy to anyone else. I screenshotted the number and called campus security because I didn't know who else to call. The guy sounded half asleep and asked if there were signs of forced entry. I said no. He asked if maybe a friend was playing a joke. I said I lived alone. He told me to block the number, save the image, and call back if anyone tried to get in. That was it. No one came out. No one checked the building. I texted my best friend a cropped version of the picture, and she immediately called, asking if I wanted to stay at her place. I almost said yes, but I had an exam at 8 the next morning and all my notes were here. So I told her I'd be fine, that it had to be some old photo from when my ex still had a key. As soon as I said it, I knew it wasn't true, but pretending it was helped me breathe. That night, I shoved my dresser in front of my bedroom door and slept with the lamp on, waking up at every little sound. Within a week, Haley started messaging me every single day. At first, it was normal stuff about the shelter, asking what days I was coming in, reminding me about a training meeting. Then she started asking about my major, my parents, where I grew up, what my long-term plans were. I answered because I didn't want to be rude to someone I'd just met, but her tone shifted fast. If I didn't reply within an hour, she'd send a stream of texts, asking if I was mad at her, or if she'd messed up already, apologizing over nothing. and then immediately asking what I was doing right then. Around the same time, I realized she was copying me. I wore a flannel shirt and jeans to the shelter one week. The next shift, she showed up in almost the exact same outfit and laughed, saying, "We're basically twins." I got a cheap denim jacket on sale. 3 days later, she had the same one. When I chopped my hair to my shoulders, she showed up with her hair cut the same way, only shorter. I tried to shrug it off as her trying to fit in, but the way she watched my face for a reaction made my skin crawl. One evening after a late lab, I took the bus home and saw her car parked across the street from my apartment. It was her old silver sedan from the shelter lot, hard to miss with the dented bumper. The engine was off, and she was just sitting there in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, staring up at my windows. For a second, I thought maybe there was some emergency at the shelter and she'd come to tell me. I stood there on the sidewalk, my backpack still on, trying to decide whether to go over. As soon as I stepped off the curb in her direction, she started the car, yanked the wheel, and pulled away fast without even glancing at me. No wave, no rolled down window, nothing. I stood there with my heart pounding, realizing she hadn't come to talk. She'd just been watching. After that, I blocked her on all social media and muted her number. I told myself I was allowed to set boundaries, that I didn't owe anyone constant access to me just because we scooped the same dog poop twice a week. At the shelter, I asked the coordinator if she could change my schedule so I wouldn't overlap with Haley anymore. She agreed and moved me to earlier days. But somehow, Haley always knew when I was coming in and would show up on the same days anyway. The coordinator later mentioned that Haley had been asking about my schedule constantly, telling her we were friends who wanted to work together. I finally told my parents that some girl from the shelter was acting weird and following me around. I didn't mention the bed photo or the car outside my building, just the pieces I thought they'd actually believe. Over speakerphone, my mom went quiet, and my dad jumped in, saying it was probably just an awkward classmate, and the best thing I could do was ignore her and not feed into it. Then one day, I came home and found a handwritten note slipped under my door. It said, "You stole what should have been mine. Everything you have belongs to me." The handwriting was neat, almost childish, and my hands were shaking as I read it. I called my dad in a panic, but he said it was probably just a prank and that I was overreacting. That made me feel even more scared, because nobody was taking this seriously. Everything exploded on a Friday night when I was leaving the campus library. I had a stack of books on one arm and my keys in my other hand when I heard someone yell my name across the parking lot. I turned and saw Haley standing between two cars, shoulders tight, face red, eyes wet. For a second, I thought she was going to apologize or ask why I blocked her. Instead, she marched straight at me and started screaming, loud enough that people getting into their cars stopped, turned around, and just stared like they were watching a fight. She shouted, "You don't even know who I am. Your dad let my mom die. He took my father's house and left me on the street. I'm your cousin, and I had nothing while you lived in your perfect world." The word cousin hit me so hard, I just stood there. I told her I didn't know what she was talking about, that I didn't have a cousin. She laughed in this cracked, angry way and said her dad, Mark, my dad's brother, died from cancer 3 years ago while she was still living in his house as her home. She said my dad inherited that house, sold it, and never gave her a cent. When she begged him to let her stay a little longer, or share anything from the sale so she could get a tiny apartment, he blocked her number and told the lawyer she wasn't his responsibility. She said she lost her dad and her home in the same month, and spent years bouncing between crappy rooms and minimum wage jobs while watching my Instagram posts with my parents, dogs, and friends. She admitted she found me online, joined shelter to see why I had them. When I got home that night, My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before I managed to open the door. My dad was in the living room with the TV on low, scrolling his phone, and my mom was folding laundry on the couch. I stood there and said, "Who is Haley? Did Uncle Mark have a daughter?" My dad's face went white. He put his phone down and just stared at me. My mom looked between us, frowning. After a long silence, he finally said, "So you ran into her, like it was inevitable tonight." I sat down because my legs suddenly felt weak and asked him if what she said was true. He stared at the carpet and admitted Mark had a daughter, that she lived with him when he got sick, and that the house went to my dad in the will. He said he sold it and kept the money because he didn't want to take on someone else's problems, and she was already an adult anyway. My mom just stared at him like she didn't recognize him, then started asking why he never told her, why he hid an entire niece. That night, my parents' argument moved from the living room to the hallway and back again until my mom finally grabbed a pillow and blanket, told my dad she couldn't even look at him, and shut herself in the guest room. He slept in his chair, pretending to watch TV. I lay awake scrolling through my old posts, seeing every happy picture with my parents the way Haley must have seen them. I never saw her again after that parking lot. She blocked me, but when I look in the mirror, I still see exactly what she lost every day. When the lawyer read my grandmother Eleanor's will out loud, I watched my great-aunt Rita's face, and I knew right then she'd been planning this for years. Everything went to her. The Portland house, the savings, the furniture, even my great-grandfather's wedding ring. My mom and uncle got nothing. Rita sat dabbing her eyes, doing the grieving sister act, but when she thought no one was looking, I caught a quick smile. On the drive back to the hotel, Mom kept repeating, "She wouldn't cut us out." And I gripped the wheel and thought, yes, she would. I'm 29 with a remote job, no kids, no mortgage, so I decided I could afford to fight. I sold my car, emptied most of my savings, and hired an estate attorney, Jennifer Cole. "Contesting a will is uphill," she said. "We need proof your grandmother didn't understand or that Rita pushed her." I told her about the move to Arizona, the changing calls, the blocked visits. One detail grabbed her: Phoenix Hospital. If those records mention dementia before the will date, that's our way in. We filed a court request. 3 months later, I sat in Jennifer's office while she flipped through a stack of hospital notes. She stopped on a neurology report. Here. Moderate vascular dementia, diagnosed 18 months before the will. A later note said, significant cognitive decline, short-term memory impairment, disorientation, 8 months before the signing. She slid the page toward me. So by the time she signed, her memory problems were on record. That's evidence. It started 6 years earlier when Rita convinced Eleanor to leave Portland for Phoenix, for the warm climate and your joints. On paper, it sounded fine. Grandma was 86 and widowed. Rita already lived there. And Mom and I were in Seattle with money and time for trips. Rita knew that. After the move, every call went through her phone on speaker. If Grandma paused, Rita supplied names and dates. Whenever Mom tried to visit, that exact week had doctor appointments or repairs. Back then, we called Rita controlling. Now it looked like a slow cutoff. When Grandma died February, Rita didn't call. She sent a text. Eleanor passed last night. Funeral Thursday. Come if you want. No time, no address. I called. She sighed. David, I'm dealing with so much right now. I maxed my credit card on last-minute flights for Mom and me. At the funeral, Rita did the devastated sister routine again, hugging everyone, barely looking at my mom. A week later, the notary called about the will. That's when we heard, "Your mother and brother are not beneficiaries," and drafted 8 months ago by attorney Roger Stanfield. I repeated his name the walk out. After the hospital records came in, Jennifer laid out the next move. "We contest for lack of capacity and undue influence," she said. "The dementia diagnosis anchors the timeline. Next, we find out how careful this Stanfield was. If he'd actually tested Grandma's understanding, that hurt us. If he'd basically trusted Rita, that helped." We scheduled his deposition. Seeing my mom's name versus Rita's on the case website made it feel less like a family argument and more like something Rita couldn't steamroll. Stanfield walked into the conference room in a wrinkled suit, mid-50s, already sweating. His lawyer sat beside him. I took a chair behind Jennifer. She started with soft questions. How long he'd practiced, how many wills a year, his standard process. Then she slid Grandma's will over. "You drafted this for Eleanor Matthews?" He said yes. "Who first contacted you?" "Her sister, Rita." "And when they came in, how did Eleanor seem?" He shifted. "Nervous. A bit confused." "Confused how?" Jennifer asked. "Dates, names, things." "Did she answer your questions herself?" "Sometimes." Rita helped her. Jennifer let that hang. Helped or answered for her? Clarified. She slid the hospital chart over. "Were you aware that 18 months before this signing, Eleanor had been diagnosed with moderate vascular dementia?" He read the line. "No." "Did you do any competency assessment? Ask orientation questions? Contact her doctor?" He swallowed. "I didn't do formal tests," he said finally. "I trusted Rita's word that my sister's fine, just nervous." We filed to contest the will in June, and the court froze the estate until a hearing in October. The Portland house my mom grew up in sits there while taxes pile up, because nobody can touch a cent without a judge's order. Mom drives by, says the yard looks worse, then changes the subject. Meanwhile, Rita hires a lawyer and calls relatives, crying that greedy nephews want to steal from the woman who cared for Eleanor. People believe her. Aunt Barbara comes over and tells my mom that Rita sacrificed her life for Eleanor, that Mom barely visited, and that now we just want money. A couple of cousins unfriend me on Facebook. Mom pretends it doesn't matter, but I hear her crying at night. Jennifer keeps saying our case is strong. We have hospital records showing dementia diagnosed 18 months before the will, and significant cognitive decline 8 months before. The lawyer who drafted the will admitted under oath that he never checked capacity and mostly listened to Rita when she answered for Eleanor. Judges see this pattern, Jennifer tells us. Move them, isolate them, change the will. Then she sends another invoice. My savings drop every month. Mom starts pulling money from a small retirement fund. At night, I sit at the kitchen table scanning birthday cards, call logs, and canceled flight confirmations so Jennifer can build a timeline. Seeing everything laid out makes it obvious Rita didn't just step in as caregiver. She slowly cut everyone else out until she was the only person Grandma depended on. About a month before the hearing, Rita's lawyer sends a settlement offer. If we drop the case, Rita will give us 30% of the estate, and we all sign that nobody did anything wrong and agree not to talk about it. Mom reads it a few times and says, "Maybe we should just accept and end this. I'm losing my sister. You're burning through your savings. This is tearing everything apart." I understand why she feels that way, but I tell her no. Taking that deal would mean saying it was okay that Rita hid the diagnosis, isolated a confused woman, and walked her into a lawyer's office to sign away everything. By then, I've spent $28,000 on legal fees, and half my family thinks I'm destroying family unity over a house. But giving up would mean pretending none of that mattered. 3 weeks later, we're in court. Jennifer walks the judge through the records and timeline, then questions the drafting lawyer until he admits he trusted Rita instead of checking Grandma's capacity. When Rita testifies, she cries, but when the judge asks why she never told us about the dementia, she just repeats, privacy, and, I didn't want to worry them. After a recess, he rules that Eleanor had been suffering cognitive impairment when she signed the last will, that Rita had a clear opportunity to influence her, and that the attorney hadn't done his job. So the new will is invalid, and the older one splitting everything between Eleanor's children is reinstated. Outside the courthouse, Mom asks if this was worth it. I think about the empty house, the drained accounts, the cousins who won't answer our messages, and I picture Grandma sitting confused in that Phoenix office while Rita spoke for her and smiled. I tell Mom I hate every part of this and will feel the damage for a long time. But if we'd stayed quiet and let Rita keep everything, I don't think I could remember my grandmother without seeing that smile. When I was 20, my older sister Rachel started falling apart, and it took me 2 years to understand why. Rachel had always been the strong one in our family, the one who never cried in public and always won arguments, so when she started changing, I honestly thought it was just stress. She was 24, an accountant, living in her own apartment about 20 minutes from our parents in Salt Lake City. We were a very religious Mormon family. Dad was on the church council, Mom led youth groups, and Dad's younger sister, Aunt Diana, ran the women's ministry. To everyone at church, Rachel was the golden oldest daughter. The first cracks I noticed were small. Rachel started skipping Sunday services, saying she had to work or had headaches. At first, everyone believed her. She'd always been the responsible one. But whenever she did show up for Sunday dinner, she looked worse. She was thinner, with dark circles under her eyes, and she barely ate. She'd zone out in the middle of conversations, and then force a smile like she suddenly remembered she was supposed to look fine. The strangest thing was how her body reacted when someone mentioned Aunt Diana. Her shoulders would tighten, her jaw would twitch for half a second, and she'd interrupt with, "Can we not talk about church stuff right now?" It looked like she was trying not to flinch. Back then, I told myself it was work or some breakup she didn't want to talk about. Rachel had always kept her relationships quiet because of how nosy everyone at church was. I tried to be gentle. I texted her and asked if she wanted to hang out, took her to get ice cream, and finally said, "You seem off lately. Are you okay?" She snapped so fast it scared me. "I'm fine, Emily. Stay out of my life." It wasn't normal older sister irritation. It felt like I'd stepped on something she was desperate to keep buried. After that, she answered my messages less and less, and I stopped pushing, but I kept paying attention. Then I saw the alcohol. Rachel never drank. She used to lecture me about the word of wisdom if I even joked about trying a beer. One afternoon, I decided to drop by her apartment without calling. She opened the door only halfway and tried to block me, saying the place was a mess. I pushed past her anyway. The apartment was cluttered, but what hit me was the trash can. Empty wine bottles, beer cans, like it wasn't the first time. I picked up a bottle and asked, "Rach, what is this?" She exploded. She ripped it out of my hand, said I had no right to show up uninvited, called me Dad's little spy, shoved my bag into my arms, and physically pushed me out of the door. The lock clicked while I was still saying her name. Mom tried next. She invited Rachel over for a quiet dinner, and afterward I heard bits of their conversation from the hallway. Mom asked if something had happened, if someone had hurt her, if she needed counseling. Rachel said she was tired of everyone putting her on a pedestal, tired of the pressure, and she wanted to live her own life. Dad called it a phase and told us she was rebelling, that we should give her space and pray for her. I wanted to believe him because the alternative, something seriously wrong with Rachel, felt too big and too vague, like a problem we wouldn't know how to fight. Through all of this, Aunt Diana kept hovering. At every family gathering, she'd show up right on time, hug everyone, and then ask Mom, very seriously, "How's Rachel doing? Has she talked to me yet?" She kept offering to visit Rachel, take her to lunch, have a heart-to-heart, just the two of us. The weird part was how hard Rachel avoided her specifically. If she heard Aunt Diana was coming to a dinner, she suddenly had to work. If they ended up in the same room, Rachel stayed on the other side and almost never looked directly at her. I noticed it over and over, and it stopped feeling like normal family tension and started feeling like fear, even if I couldn't prove it. Everything collapsed last summer. I was at home when Mom got a call from a number she didn't recognize. She went silent, grabbed her purse, and just said, "It's Rachel," on her way out. Later, I found out Rachel's neighbors had heard her stereo blasting for hours and finally knocked, then called 911 when she didn't answer. The paramedics found her unconscious on the floor. She'd mixed alcohol with sleeping pills. At the hospital, the doctors told Mom it didn't look accidental and insisted on a psychiatric evaluation. Mom stayed by Rachel's bed for 3 days, sleeping in the chair, barely texting me back. Dad handled work, church, and all the practical stuff, but when I saw him at night, his hands were shaking. On the 3rd day, Mom finally came home to shower and change clothes. She sat at the kitchen table and just started crying before she even said hello. Between breaths, she explained that Rachel had broken down at the hospital. She kept saying she couldn't carry it anymore, that she'd been punished for 2 years already, and didn't see the point of living if it never ended. Mom told her nothing she said would make us stop loving her, that she was safe. Slowly, Rachel told her. 2 years earlier, she'd gotten pregnant by a guy she'd dated briefly from work. They agreed they weren't ready for a baby or marriage. Knowing exactly how our family and congregation would react, Rachel drove to another state and had an abortion there so nobody from church would see her name on anything. For a while, the secret held. Then a few months later, when she moved into her current apartment, Aunt Diana offered to help. None of us thought anything of it. That was what Aunt Diana did. She served. While they were carrying boxes, a folder fell open and some medical papers slid onto the floor. By the time Rachel grabbed them, Aunt Diana had already seen enough. Mom said Rachel described it like watching her entire life collapse in 1 second. The very next day, Aunt Diana called her and, in this steady, calm voice, said, "I know what you did. It's a sin before God. If you don't want the whole family and congregation to know, you'll help me with some things." Mom sat me down after visiting Rachel in the hospital and told me everything honestly. For 2 years, I'd watched my sister fall apart and assumed she was just rebelling. I never imagined the one pushing her down was our perfect church Aunt Diana. Rachel told Mom it started right after the abortion, with a single phone call. At first, she didn't ask for money, only for help with extra church tasks. Rachel was told to finish reports, update contact lists, and drive Diana to meetings. Rachel said yes, because saying no to Dad's holy little sister felt dangerous and stupid. Small favors didn't stay small. They multiplied until Rachel was basically working as Diana's assistant. Then came errands that had nothing to do with church, but Rachel still did them anyway. Rachel told Mom she kept thinking, "If I do enough, Diana will finally forgive me." Money came after that, dressed up as charity for women who couldn't afford retreats or rent. When Rachel hesitated, Diana asked what Dad would say if he heard about the murder. It wasn't once. It opened a door Diana had no intention of closing ever again. Later, she admitted she had serious gambling debts from online casinos, and needed temporary financial help. She said they both had sins and should help each other, keep everything strictly between family. Diana said one conversation with the right people would destroy Rachel's life completely and permanently. Over 2 years, Rachel emptied savings, maxed a credit card, and handed over thousands in cash. She worked full-time, did Diana's committee paperwork at night, and drank more just to fall asleep. By the time the neighbors found her unconscious on the floor, she saw no way out. I wanted to stand on her porch and tell her I knew everything she had done. She said Diana would cry, twist the story, and Rachel would be branded a liar forever. Mom sat him down at the table and described everything, slowly, without raising her voice once. She told him about the abortion, the phone call, the favors, the money, the gambling. Then he called Diana on speaker and slowly repeated Rachel's story, almost word for word back. She said she had only tried to guide Rachel back to God after a terrible mistake. She claimed she had begged Rachel not to get the abortion and been completely shut out. He said there was no proof, only stories from a very troubled, dramatic, addicted young woman. Mom told him she couldn't stay with someone who protected his sister instead of his child. A month later, she filed for divorce quietly, without announcing anything in sacrament meeting at church. No messages, no recordings, no bank trail. Everything had been cash and careful, scared conversations. Rachel said she would rather disappear completely than sit in court while strangers discussed her worst decision. Instead, we started packing, even though it felt like running away from a fire we hadn't started ourselves. We left without a goodbye talk, without a final Sunday. We just stopped showing up altogether. I go to school and a part-time job and drive Rachel to therapy twice every week. Relatives tell us Diana still runs women's ministry and smiles while teaching lessons about purity and forgiveness. Sometimes he texts me that his door is always open if we come back to the right path. I think about exposing Diana all the time, going to the police or emailing the council. We chose her life and a quiet, maybe unfair safety over our reputation and any chance of seeing Diana punished. So when I was 32, my family faced something I still can't fully process. My uncle Dennis was 35 and had lived on my aunt and uncle's couch for 8 years straight, playing video games and ordering pizza on their credit card. He never kept a job longer than 3 months, never showed interest in anyone but himself. Then my grandfather got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and Dennis volunteered to be his caregiver. We all went silent at the dinner table when he said it. He talked about making amends and last chances to bond with Grandpa, hands folded like he was praying. My mom, his sister, looked skeptical. Uncle Rob openly scoffed. But Grandpa Arthur, 82 years old, and just told he had 12 to 18 months to live, looked at Dennis with unexpected warmth. "Give the boy a chance," Grandpa said in his raspy voice. How could we refuse a dying man's wish? None of us actually trusted Dennis. This was the guy who forgot job interviews because a game update dropped. But the hospital social worker lit up when she heard someone in the family would move in. "It's the best option," she said. Dennis promised to quit gaming, promised to be all in. He signed forms so he could pick up prescriptions and pay bills from Grandpa's account. Mom muttered that she'd watch the bank statements. I told her I'd keep an eye on the meds since I worked as a pharmacy tech. Dennis caught enough of that to sulk, saying nobody believed he could grow up. Grandpa shut it down, told us we were clinging to the past. 2 days later, Dennis carried his duffel into Grandpa's spare room like he'd just gotten promoted. The first few weeks looked surprisingly normal. Dennis texted group photos of breakfast plates and side-by-side selfies on the way to chemo. When we visited on Sundays, The house smelled like real food instead of frozen pizza. Grandpa looked thinner but calm, leaning on Dennis's arm, telling us, "You all underestimated him." I wanted to believe him. Then around week 6, the tone changed. Mom asked lightly how he was feeling. Grandpa snapped, "Fine." "Why do you visit so rarely? Only Dennis is here every day." Mom's face went blank. We'd been coming twice a week. I glanced at my brother Blake and saw the same thought hit him. That wasn't just crankiness. That was implanted. Over the next visits, Grandpa kept saying versions of it. "Dennis takes care of everything. You just pass through." It sounded rehearsed. 3 more weeks, and Dennis started blocking us. He'd step out on the porch and pull the door almost shut behind him. "Grandpa needs rest. Doctor said minimal stress," he'd explain, muscles planted in the doorway. "Chemo wipes him out. Don't take it personal." When we called, Grandpa said he was tired, told us to come another time. His voice was slower, words slightly smeared together. I kept asking Dennis to send a photo of the pill boxes so I could check dosages. He'd promise, then forget, or send a blurry picture where all I could see was orange plastic. One Wednesday, I lost patience and just walked past him when he opened the door. He grabbed my arm on reflex. I yanked away and went straight for the living room. Grandpa was in his recliner, head slumped forward, eyes half open but not really tracking. The TV was on some daytime show. He wasn't watching. "Grandpa?" I said. It took a few beats for his gaze to land on me. "Jesse? When did you arrive?" he asked, like I'd been gone for months instead of 3 days. His pajama pants were falling off his hips. His hands shook when he reached for the water Dennis handed him, and half of it spilled onto his shirt. On the side table, I noticed 3 different prescription bottles, one without a cap, a few pills scattered beside it. When I picked one up, Dennis snatched the bottle from my hand. "Don't mix them up," he said. "I've got a system. Doctor knows." By then, Grandpa was losing weight at a terrifying speed. 20 pounds in maybe 2 months. His skin turned gray, eyes sinking into bruised-looking circles. When I tried talking to him, he'd slur answers, forget what we were talking about, fall asleep mid-sentence. Dennis insisted it was all expected. "Cancer's aggressive, doctor." "Miller warned us," he'd say, printing out some generic-looking notes about end-stage symptoms. One night, I called Dr. Miller's office myself from my car outside the house. The secretary checked the chart and said, he canceled his last 2 appointments. His nephew called, said the patient was too weak for treatment. I just sat there holding the phone, staring at the lit windows of Grandpa's house, listening to Dennis inside laughing at something on TV. The next day, I demanded we call an ambulance and have Grandpa admitted. Dennis stared at me like I'd suggested murder. "He hates hospitals," he said. "Why torture him for maybe a few extra weeks?" I told him it wasn't his decision alone. He sighed and led me to Grandpa's bedroom. "Arthur, Jessica wants to send you to the hospital," he announced loudly. Grandpa blinked up at us, tongue heavy, words sticky. "No, hospitals," he mumbled. "Want home. Leave me." His voice was barely sound. I knelt beside the bed and asked again, slowly, if he felt safe, if anyone was giving him too many pills. He shook his head a millimeter and turned his face toward the wall. Dennis met my eyes over him, expression calm, almost satisfied. What could I do against a patient's stated wishes? I still replay that week in my head, counting pills I memorized from those orange bottles, matching strengths to refill dates I processed at work, seeing that the math didn't work and knowing it would never be enough in court. Mom said we couldn't accuse Dennis without proof, that Grandpa had chosen him and chosen to stay home. Any fight would only rip things open after he was gone. I understood the logic and still hated it. It felt like watching someone balance their entire future on the word of the laziest man you knew, just because he happened to be standing closest to the bed. Exactly 4 months after diagnosis, 3 times faster than the prognosis, Grandpa died in his sleep. Dennis called at 6 a.m., voice shaking. "Jess, he's gone." I walked into his room and he just didn't wake up. The funeral passed in a total blur. He said, "I just did what anyone would do." That wrong feeling in my chest didn't move an inch. The next day I went to Grandpa's house to start sorting his things. I emptied the drawer, unplugged the lamp, pulled the nightstand from the wall, and heard something plastic drop. On the floor was a medication blister pack. It was oxycodone, and the pack was empty. I flipped it over and read the label out of habit. 30 tablets, filled 2 weeks before Grandpa died. The instructions said, "Take every 12 hours, no more than 2 pills daily." Even at the maximum dose, there should have been leftovers. In the bathroom, I dug through the trash and found 2 more empty blisters from the same prescription under tissues. When Dennis walked by and noticed us, he asked what we were doing. I said the refill dates didn't match the dosage. He shrugged and said Grandpa had been in constant pain, that the doctor knew they were going through pills fast, that I wasn't a doctor, and he walked away. That night I called Blake and Uncle Rob, sent the photos, told them I wanted exhumation and an autopsy. The paperwork took time, but they exhumed Grandpa's body. The autopsy report came back with clear wording: signs of opioid overdose, respiratory depression, drug levels in tissue far above therapeutic range. Police opened an investigation. Detective Ramirez interviewed each of us, then brought Dennis in. Later, Ramirez told us Dennis said Grandpa's pain had become unbearable, that Grandpa begged for extra pills, that he couldn't refuse a dying man. "I just wanted to ease his suffering," he'd repeated. Miller had prescribed painkillers, but the dosage and refill pattern didn't match what the autopsy showed. Grandpa was terminal, and overdose could be argued as him self-medicating. Ramirez said prosecutors wouldn't file homicide charges without something concrete tying Dennis to the extra pills. Then we got hit with the will change. At the reading, the lawyer explained that about a week before Grandpa died, he had changed one major item. The house, which had always been meant for Uncle Rob and his 3 kids, now went to Dennis. We hired lawyers and contested it. In court, the notary testified that on the signing day, Grandpa answered all competency questions, knew what he owned, and understood what he was signing. The date was 2 months after Dennis moved in, when Grandpa was still mostly clear. The judge upheld the will. Dennis sold the house for $340,000 and moved out the next week. He relocated to Nevada, rented an apartment in Reno, and got a remote tech support job. I hired a private detective and over 3 years paid him $12,000 to follow every legal trail. No new elderly friends, no shady businesses, no luxury toys. 6 years have passed. Every year on the anniversary of Grandpa's death, I go to the cemetery and stand at his grave and think about those empty blisters, the canceled appointments, the will change, all lining up. I know, with a certainty that has nothing to do with court standards, that Dennis killed him slowly with pills while acting like a devoted caregiver, and that he bought himself a comfortable life with what he got for that house. And I also know that unless something in Dennis breaks and he chooses to confess, that truth will stay stuck with me and the few family members who believe it, while Grandpa stays just another quiet death on paper. Back in 2008, when I was 18 and home from college for Thanksgiving, my mother fell dead at the dinner table, and my father has been dying ever since. One second she was telling my uncle to stop feeding the dog under the table. The next, she grabbed her chest and hit the floor. The paramedics tried, but they were basically just there to say she was already gone. After that, Dad went on autopilot for years, work and bills and frozen dinners, but everyone could see the lights were mostly off. 3 years ago, they finally called it dementia. He'd been getting lost driving to the grocery store, leaving the stove on, asking me if I'd finished my SATs even though I was 32. The doctors ran through every pill and patch they had. Nothing stopped the slide. 8 months ago, after he wandered out of the house in January in just a t-shirt, they moved him to St. Teresa Hospice. That's when his brain locked into what Dr. Chen calls a traumatic loop. He relives Thanksgiving 2008 over and over, stuck in the last happy stretch before my mother's heart gave out. I visit every Saturday at 2. It makes me feel like I'm still his son, and not just the guy who signs consent forms. Today, when I walked into his room, he was sitting on the bed, staring at the empty visitor chair, lips moving. "Martha, pass the gravy," he said to nobody. Then he chuckled. "Charles, don't take a second helping. Remember your cholesterol." That was my mother's voice coming out of his throat. He turned toward the window. "Mom, you really baked 3 pies. That's too much." I sat next to him and took his hand. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on some invisible table in the middle of the room. In his head, I was still the 18-year-old who'd just dragged his suitcase in the door, not a 35-year-old man. "Mark, grab the rolls from the kitchen," he said, squeezing my fingers like he expected me to stand up. I just sat there, listening to him answer people who had been dead for years. He thanked Grandma for the turkey, repeated Grandpa's football joke, laughed too loud at nothing. This went on for around 20 minutes. Then his face twisted like he'd smelled something burning. "Julia! Julia!" he shouted, my mother's name tearing out of him. That was always the moment in the loop when she dropped her fork and collapsed. He never remembers the CPR or the sirens. His mind slams into that second and breaks. Right on cue, he relaxed, shoulders dropping, breath evening out. "Martha, pass the gravy." Same words, same tone. His head jerked like he heard Aunt Martha's fork hit the plate. "Careful with that china," he muttered at a sound I couldn't hear. A second later, he smiled at the blank TV like he was looking at Grandpa. Dr. Chen explained months ago that his brain is stuck in the last safe memory before the trauma. When it reaches the part where Mom dies, it reboots to avoid the hit. Sometimes the loop runs an hour, sometimes 20 minutes. Today, on the 3rd run, halfway through a compliment about Grandma's stuffing, he just stopped. His jaw hung open for a second. Then his eyes blinked and actually focused on my face. For a moment, they looked like they used to when I'd come home from school and he'd ask about my day. "Mark," he said. This time it wasn't a line in the script. He looked around at the white walls, the hospital bed, the IV taped to his arm. "Where am I?" His voice was clear and shaking. I hit the call button but didn't let go of his hand. "You're in hospice, Dad. You're sick. Do you remember?" I kept my tone even so I wouldn't scare him back into the fog. He stared at me, tears sliding down without him wiping them away. "Julia is dead," he said. "I know. 17 years ago," I answered. He swallowed. His gaze went to the corner of the room like he was counting who should be there. "Everyone is dead," he whispered. "Except you. You're not 18 anymore." He raised a trembling hand and touched my cheek like he was checking it was real. Dr. Chen hurried in a minute later. I asked, "Is this permanent? Did he come back?" She shined a light in his eyes, checked his pulse, asked him his name and mine. He answered both. "Sometimes dementia patients exit the loop for a short time, usually just a few minutes," she said. "Then the brain returns to the traumatic cycle. Dad was quiet, but I could see he was hearing her. He realized he was sick, that he'd lost 17 years, that he was going to be dragged back to that table again whether he wanted it or not. "I don't want to go back there," he whispered. His hand squeezed mine hard, then weakened. His gaze started to slide past me, not landing on anything. His lips moved. "Martha, pass the gravy," he said again, and his hand slipped from mine. He didn't see me anymore, but this time something was different. Every few minutes he went quiet and looked around with panic in his eyes, like he'd been dropped into the wrong room. "Where are the walls?" he muttered once in the middle of asking Aunt Martha about the potatoes. A little later he rubbed his arms and stared past the bed. "Why is it so cold?" he asked nobody. The loop he'd lived in for months wasn't solid anymore. Bits of the hospital room were leaking into 2008, and every time it happened his whole body tightened with confusion. Dr. Chen stood at the foot of the bed, writing in his chart while my father argued with people who were not there. When there was a pause, she said quietly, "The dementia is progressing. He's getting stuck between two realities, the loop and these brief moments of clarity. This will only get worse." There was no softness in her voice, just facts. I nodded because there was nothing to argue with. A second later, Dad jerked his head toward the door. "Mark, are you here? Where's the hospital?" he shouted, staring straight through me. Then his eyes slid away. He started laughing at Grandpa's football joke again like nothing strange had happened. I stayed another hour and listened to him run through that dinner a fifth time. The script stayed the same, but now he kept cutting himself off to yell, "Mark, are you here? Where's the hospital? Where did it go?" Then he slid right back into telling my dead grandmother how good the turkey tasted. When I finally forced myself to leave, the evening nurse stopped me and said, "He could live months more in this state." I looked back and saw him talking to ghosts, trembling. I drive back to the hospice every Saturday because I don't know what else to do. Staying home feels worse, like I'm abandoning him on purpose. Last week, Dad had 3 clear moments while I sat there, each less than a minute. He would suddenly focus on me and ask, "Where am I?" And by the time I answered, he was already back in 2008 asking Aunt Martha to pass the rolls. Dr. Chen says those clear flashes will get more frequent but shorter, so his mind keeps snapping between past and present and never really stays in either place. All the relatives from that Thanksgiving dinner are gone now. Grandma, Grandpa, Aunt Martha, every person he talks to in that room is already dead. I'm the only one left from that table. I was 18 then, home from my first semester of college, bored and worried about exams, not heart attacks. Dad has been reliving that night for 8 months in hospice, probably longer before we noticed the pattern. I sat down once and did the math. It came out to roughly 1,500 Thanksgivings. The loop never changes. The gravy passes, the joke lands, my mother collapses again. Yesterday he called me from the room phone during one of those clear minutes. His voice shook. "Is this real?" he asked. "Am I in the hospital or at dinner? I don't know anymore." I told him he was in the hospital, that 2008 was only a memory, that I was really there with him. 5 seconds later I heard him say, away from the receiver, "Martha, pass the gravy." The countdown keeps going. 3 years since diagnosis, 8 months in hospice, and they say he could last another 6 months, maybe more, trapped between that dinner and this room. When I was 22, my cousin Marisa started posting photos from yachts off Miami coast, designer dresses, champagne glasses, always with the hashtag family business. The last message she ever sent me was 3.5 years ago. You're just jealous I'm living while you sit in an office for $45,000 a year. Don't write me anymore. Then she blocked me. Instagram, Facebook, phone. That was March 2020. In October 2023, Florida police identified her body by dental records. Deer hunters found a burned Toyota Camry in the woods, 60 miles from Tampa. Charred remains inside. Detective Ramirez told my Aunt Valerie unofficially after interrogation, "Ma'am, this looks like a hit. Your daughter got involved with the wrong people." My aunt screamed it was an accident, that Marisa was loved by everyone, that she was a good girl. We both knew that was a lie. Back when those yacht photos first started, I was in Orlando working an office job, texting Marisa on my breaks. We'd grown up close. She slept on my floor when her mom's relationships blew up. After her dad overdosed, money became her answer to everything. So when her feed suddenly turned into brands and bottle service, I asked if she was okay. She snapped that I was negative and didn't get Miami. After that, she only got colder. That last text felt like a door slamming. An hour later, my calls went straight to voicemail. For a while, I still watched from a burner account. Family business under everything. Yachts, balconies, club bathrooms, guys half-cropped out of frame. The captions got nastier toward haters. She'd post stacks of cash and talk about real hustlers, and my aunt would repost with heart emojis. My dad told me to screenshot everything. "People pretend they didn't see the warning signs," he said. When the call came about the burned Camry, it wasn't shocking. It felt like the end of a straight line we'd seen coming. It started when Aunt Valerie was 46 and introduced the family to her new boyfriend, Carlos Esteban, successful businessman from Miami, owned a chain of auto shops and nightclubs. My dad, Valerie's brother, told me right away, "Stay away from him." I had a detective friend run a check. Carlos has 2 sons from his first marriage. Older one, Miguel, is serving time in Rayford for armed robbery since 2015. Middle one, Diego, was shot dead in 2018 outside a Hialeah club. Police say gang dispute. Carlos runs a network of illegal bookmaking and extortion, just knows how to stay off the radar. Aunt Valerie married Carlos 6 months later, moved from Orlando to Carlos's mansion in Coral Gables, drove a Range Rover, wore diamonds. Marisa was 19 then, studying interior design at community college, but dropped out a month after her mom's wedding. After the move, Marisa changed fast. She stopped coming up for holidays, stopped answering my grandma's calls, started talking like the rest of us were stuck. When my mom asked Valerie if Marisa was still enrolled, she paused, then said Carlos thought real-world experience was better than debt. My dad stared at the wall after that. "People like him don't give your kid opportunities," he finally said. "They give them jobs that are hard to walk away from." She started posting photos from expensive dinners, boutiques, private beaches, always with family business hashtag, never specifying which business. Dad tried reaching Marisa through Aunt Valerie, called her, begged her to get her daughter out of that environment before it was too late. Aunt cried on the phone, said she tried, that Marisa wouldn't listen, that Carlos promised her daughter a job at the company, good money, a career. Dad didn't believe her. "Valerie, are you scared of Carlos or scared of losing the mansion?" Aunt hung up. 6 months later, I learned what Marisa was doing. Dad's detective friends said she was spotted in South Beach bars. She'd meet men, flirt, extract information about where they lived, what they owned, when they'd be home. Classic honeypot for gathering intel before extortion or robbery. Just dirty, dangerous work. Nothing glamorous at all for anyone. I messaged Marisa on Instagram. "Your stepdad is using you for crimes. When police get to him, you'll go to prison too." She replied, "You're just jealous I'm living while you sit in an office for $45,000 a year. Don't write me anymore," and blocked me. Seeing user not found, Where her name used to be felt like she had picked Carlos over us. I showed the screenshots to my dad. He said, "Then she's in it," and told me not to ask around about Carlos. "These people don't argue," he said. "They erase problems." I hated it, but I listened. Marisa disappeared in June 2021. At first, Aunt Valerie called it drama, said Marisa was probably with some guy and ignoring calls. After 3 days, she started to panic. She called me, my parents, cousins. Nobody had heard from her. A week went by, then 2. Valerie checked the clubs Marisa liked, asked bouncers, messaged old friends. Nothing. Marisa's last Instagram story was champagne with the family business hashtag. After that, nothing. When a month passed with no sign, Valerie went to the police. They took the report but said missing adults were low priority next to kids and active cases. A few weeks later, she hired a private detective. At first, she used savings, then quietly sold jewelry Carlos had bought her. The PI sent short reports, stills of Marisa leaving a bar, timestamps of her last ATM use, a list of numbers. Then the updates thinned out and turned into working leads. After a year and a lot of money, he admitted he had nothing. Marisa's last online activity was that VIP story about 2 weeks before they think she vanished. Her phone pinged one tower on the edge of Miami and then shut off for good. My dad kept telling Valerie she needed to push the police to question Carlos. "At least make them rule him out," he said. Valerie shut down. She told detectives Carlos had been home with her the night Marisa disappeared, that they watched a movie, went to bed. He never left. She repeated the same line to my dad until he stopped. That gave Carlos an alibi. Later, Carlos went on local news, sat next to Valerie, begged for tips, offered a reward, dabbed his eyes. I watched and felt my stomach twist. It looked like acting. About 2 years later, hunters found a burned Toyota in the woods. Dental records said it was Marisa, and she had been dead at least 2 years. Police treated it as homicide and questioned Carlos, Aunt Valerie, and people who knew her, but nothing came of it. A detective told my dad it probably tied to Carlos's business, maybe rivals or one of his own guys. Officially, it was homicide by unknown perpetrator, with no real chance of solving. Carlos had a clean alibi in Las Vegas that week, backed by casino cameras and receipts, and Valerie clung to that as proof he was innocent. When they released her remains, we had a funeral. Valerie told everyone it was an accident, that Marisa was a good girl who fell in with the wrong crowd. I stood by the casket thinking if I had pushed harder, gone to Miami, maybe she would still be alive. Carlos hugged Valerie, whispered to her, rubbed her back. I stared at the floor, scared that if I looked at him, I would start screaming what everyone there already knows but never says, that he killed her or had it done, and that Aunt Valerie chose the mansion over her daughter. A week after I escaped from the religious commune, I got the first letter with no return address, filled with surveillance photos of me and text about a prophecy. The countdown to my 30th birthday continues, and they're still watching me. But let me start from how I even got there. When the private investigator found my birth mother, I'd been waiting for that moment my whole life. I'm Emily, 26. I grew up in a normal suburb with adoptive parents who loved me and hated that they couldn't answer basic questions about my past. Closed adoption. No contact. That was all they had. When I turned 25, I took some savings from my office job and hired a private investigator. For almost a year it was dead ends, and we're still working on it. Then, one Tuesday, he called and said, very calmly, "We found your mother." He gave me her name, Rachel, and an address tied to something called the New Covenant Community, a couple hours outside Portland. We set a meeting for the next day at a cafe downtown. I got there early and sat by the window, watching every middle-aged woman who walked in. When a woman in worn jeans and a stretched-out sweater came through the door, scanning the room, I knew before she opened her mouth. Same nose, same jawline, just older and more tired. She hugged me in this quick, clumsy way, and we sat down. At first, it was small talk. My job, her health, how long I'd lived in the city. Then she started talking about the community, like I already knew what that meant. She said New Covenant was a rural Christian settlement. Farming, homeschooling, shared meals, morning and evening prayers, no TV or bars. She talked about it like a safe bubble away from the sickness of the world. On the surface, it sounded strict, but not insane. I'd grown up around church people, just not this intense. Only then did she talk about why she'd given me up. She'd been 19, unmarried, not yet undercovering, as she put it. Getting pregnant with me had been a serious sin, and the elders had arranged the adoption. She said she had prayed for me every year on my birthday. Her hands shook around her coffee cup. I wanted to be angry, but mostly I just felt exhausted and weirdly sad watching this ordinary woman clearly carrying something she never really processed. Toward the end, she squeezed my hand and said, "You should come meet everyone. Come this weekend before harvest starts. They'll want to welcome you." In my head, I saw awkward dinners, maybe some hymn singing, maybe a bunch of people hugging me too long. I wanted to know if I had siblings. I didn't want to look ungrateful or paranoid. I said yes. On the way back to my car, the practical part of my brain finally spoke up. When Rachel texted me the address, I forwarded it to my best friend Sarah with, "Going to meet Bio Mom's church people on Saturday back by 10 p.m. If you don't hear from me, call cops LOL." She wrote back, "Cult vibes, but okay. I'll track you." On Saturday, I drove out there. The city thinned into fields and trees until GPS dumped me onto a narrow road that ended at a metal gate standing wide open. A peeling wooden sign read, "New Covenant." No guards, no cameras, just kids' bikes leaning against a fence. Rachel waited near the drive, arms folded, smile stretched too tight. She hugged me again, quick, and led me toward a big white house that had more of an office feel than a home. Inside, she took me straight into a long room where 3 older men in black suits sat at a table. They didn't stand up. Rachel stopped by the door behind me and stared at the floor. The oldest man introduced himself as Isaiah. He opened a cracked leather book full of cramped handwriting and started talking without even saying hello. He said my mother had committed fornication by bearing me out of wedlock, that my existence was an open wound in their line. God, he said, had given a path to purify that wound before my 30th birthday. Purification, according to him, meant 3 days of fasting and prayer in isolation. No contact, no phone, total submission until the old self dies. His tone was flat, like he was reciting rules he'd repeated 100 times. At first, I thought this was just some manipulative lecture, and I could walk out whenever I wanted. Then I pushed my chair back and stood up, and 2 men I hadn't even seen before stepped in front of the only door. Work clothes, blank expressions. They didn't touch me. They didn't have to. They were just there, filling the space I needed to leave. My heart dropped hard, not in a dramatic way, just a cold, clear, this is bad way. I turned toward Rachel and said, "Tell them this is insane. Tell them I'm leaving." She finally looked up at me. For a second, I saw pure panic and guilt, like she was a kid caught doing something awful. But she didn't move. Isaiah answered for her. He said she knew all of this, that she had prayed for years for a way to redeem her sin, and inviting me here was that answer. One of the men at the door reached into his jacket and pulled out a small coil of rope, the cheap hardware store kind, taped at the ends. It wasn't ceremonial, it was practical. That was the moment the label in my head changed from weird religious meeting to kidnapping about to happen. There wasn't time to argue theology or appeal to anyone's better nature. Whatever humanity Rachel had left in this was buried under years of indoctrination. I didn't think. My body just went. I grabbed the wooden chair I'd been sitting on and hurled it toward the man with the rope. He flinched and threw his arms up, and that half-second opening was all I was going to get. I spun, aimed at the side window, and kicked as hard as I could. The glass cracked on the first hit and shattered on the second. I shoved the shards aside with my sleeve and climbed through, feeling them slice into my forearm as I scraped over the frame. I hit the ground and ran for my car. Gravel slid under my shoes. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys once, swore out loud, then got them into the lock on the second try. When the engine finally caught, something in me made me look up at the house instead of just flooring it. 3 men stood on the steps in a neat line. They weren't chasing me. They just watched. Rachel was beside them, smaller than I remembered from the cafe, arms hanging useless at her sides. I drove until I saw a sign for the nearest town and followed it straight to a squat brick building with police over the door. Inside, I went up to the first uniform I saw, a stocky guy with a badge that said Dennis, and dumped everything out in one long breath. The elders, the talk about sin and purification, the men blocking the door, the rope, the broken window, the fact that I'd never agreed to stay there. He had me sit. He wrote things down. He glanced at the cut on my arm and asked if I needed a bandage. When I finally ran out of words, I said, "So, you'll go out there, right? You'll at least check it out?" Dennis let out a long breath through his nose. He said the New Covenant Commune was an officially registered religious organization. They'd never had any complaints stick. There were no clear signs of violence on me, and they'd just say I'd come voluntarily and gotten spooked. When I pushed again about an investigation, he hesitated, then finally looked me in the eye and said, the county sheriff, Harris, was a parishioner of their church, and this was a family matter. A week later, a plain white envelope with no return address showed up in my mailbox. I almost threw it out with the grocery ads, but my full name was written on the front in this stiff, careful handwriting. Inside were printed photos of me leaving my building the morning of October 23rd, me at a cafe on the 25th, me at a gas station on the 27th. All of them were pulled from security cameras in public places, slightly grainy but clear enough that you could not mistake that it was me. On the back of each photo someone had written, Book of Covenant Chapter 7, and she shall come at the appointed hour. Below that was a neat list of my trips, meetups with friends, work events, and even my dentist appointment for the past month. The last line at the bottom said, 3 years, 7 months until your 30th birthday, the prophecy will be fulfilled. I wanted to believe it was just some dramatic guess, that they had filled in the blanks from my social media. That idea lasted maybe 5 minutes. Every date in the letter matched my calendar exactly, down to the day I had driven north to visit my parents in Seattle. I opened the scans of their Book of Covenant pages that I had saved on my laptop and read Chapter 7 again. The so-called prophecies were as vague as I remembered. Phrases like journey to the north, meeting with a healer, and gathering with many at one table. Any normal life could be bent to fit those words, but the exact dates and places in my letters were the part that made my stomach feel hollow. Whoever wrote this was not guessing. They were following me. I went through every place they could have pulled information from. I scrolled my posts, old tagged photos, stories where friends had checked us into bars or restaurants. I shut off location settings on every app I could, deleted anything I did not absolutely need, and changed my email passwords. I even called my dentist office and asked, pretending it was about insurance, who handled their security cameras. The receptionist sounded confused and said some outside company took care of it. She did not know the name. That was when it really sank in that New Covenant was not just a handful of people on a farm, but a network spread into regular jobs with access to systems I could not see. Security cameras, public records, maybe someone with access to phone data. They did not need magic when they had that. That night, I lay in bed staring at the dark ceiling and replayed every camera I had walked past that week, knowing someone on their land might have been staring back. After that, I changed my locks, deleted social accounts, and kept changing my route to work, so I was never predictable. The envelopes showed up once a week, each one with new photos and one line at the bottom. 3 years, 6 months, then 3 years, 5 months. Sarah told me to move states and change my name, but I could not stand hiding forever from people everyone treated as harmless church folks. I hired a lawyer, saved every envelope, and sat beside her while another board officer said there were no direct threats and nothing to investigate. 4 months have passed. Rachel has not called. I find no ex-members, and yesterday's envelope held a photo of me at my door, with 3 years, 3 months until fulfillment. I dated Vanessa for 8 months before noticing the oddity. Her house had no family photos with more than 4 people. Every picture in the living room, on the fridge, in the little albums showed the same 4 faces. Vanessa, her younger sister Sophie, their mom, their dad. The dates on the prints all started in 2019. There were no childhood shots, no crooked school photos, nothing older than a few years. When I finally asked, Vanessa barely glanced up and said, "Too fast. We're not very photogenic. We only started taking pictures recently," then changed the subject. Her parents, Greg and Patricia, were the same way. They were kind, but they kept a wall up. At dinners, we talked about work, weather, news. Anytime I mentioned my family or childhood, they smiled, said, "Nice," and moved on. Sophie was 22, still living at home, working part-time. She was quiet, kept her eyes down, and avoided looking men in the face, even me. When a door closed too hard or someone dropped a spoon, she flinched so sharply it looked painful. I noticed, but told myself she was just anxious, and it wasn't my business. Vanessa and I moved in together, then got married. Her parents paid for part of the wedding, posed for pictures, acted normal. But in every new family photo, it was still only the 4 of them together, lined up the same way. I never saw any picture with more people, never heard about an older brother. I had questions, but life was busy and I let it slide. A year after our wedding, truth came out by accident. We were at Greg and Patricia's for Sunday dinner. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, small talk. Everyone seemed fine. I felt relaxed, started telling a story about my younger brother Dan and his embarrassing attempt to learn surfing on vacation. I finished with, "Brothers and sisters always end up in the craziest stories together," and laughed. The table went silent. Sophie stared at her plate, suddenly pale. Her hand shook so hard that her fork slipped. It hit the plate with a loud clang and she jumped like someone had slapped her. She whispered, "Excuse me," stood up fast, and walked out of the room. Vanessa covered her face with both hands. Greg and Patricia stared down at their food. The air felt wrong. "What did I say?" I asked, but nobody answered. Vanessa pushed her chair back and jerked her head toward the hallway for me to follow, then headed after Sophie. We found Sophie on the back porch, sitting on the steps, smoking with trembling hands. Without turning around, she said, flat, "I quit 2 years ago," and took another drag. Vanessa sat down beside her and put an arm around her shoulders. I stayed in the doorway, feeling like I'd stepped into something I didn't understand. We went back inside eventually, but dinner was basically over. On the drive home, Vanessa stared out the window and barely spoke. That night, in bed with the lights off, she finally said, "I need to tell you about Nathan." I'd heard the name once or twice, always dropped, and then ignored. "My older brother," she added. "He was 25 when it happened." Her voice was steady, but she kept twisting the blanket in her hands like she needed something to hold. She told me Nathan had been the smart one, studying engineering, the person everyone expected to go far. At 19, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Medication brought him back enough to go on with school, but he hated the side effects, complained about weight gain, constant tiredness, feeling numb all the time. For a while, he took the pills because the doctors warned him what would happen if he stopped. Then he began pretending. He'd hide tablets, skip doses, tell Greg and Patricia he was fine. Over the next 2 years, he grew suspicious and restless, checking locks again and again, closing curtains, asking if anyone was watching the house. Vanessa sometimes heard him talking and laughing alone in his room. He started saying that demons disguise themselves as humans, first like a joke, then like he believed it. Their parents blamed stress from university, told him to push through, and tried not to argue so he wouldn't explode. 4 years ago, in the winter of 2019, everything finally broke. Sophie was 18, just out of high school, asleep in her room around 3 in the morning. Nathan burst in, slamming the door against the wall, and shouted, "You're not my sister! You're a demon who stole her soul!" He was holding a big kitchen knife from downstairs. Sophie tried to run past him into the hallway, but he grabbed a handful of her hair and yanked her back. She threw her arm up to protect her face, and the knife came down across her forearm, a deep cut that opened it wide and started pouring blood. The pain jolted her into blind panic. She twisted, kicked, somehow slipped out of his grip and ran bleeding for the bathroom, leaving red smears on the wall and carpet. She slammed the door and managed to turn the lock just as he reached it and began pounding with his fist and the knife handle. Nathan screamed that demons were in the house and he had to burn them out, yelling about purification by fire over and over as he hit the door. Sophie sat on the bathroom floor, pressing a towel against her arm, listening to the frame shake and his voice crack from screaming. Neighbors heard the screams and called the police. When the police broke down the front door that night, they found Nathan on the hallway floor, covered in his sister's blood, rocking and crying. "Where's my sister? What did the demon do to her?" He didn't fight, didn't run, didn't even look at the officers. He just stared at his own hands like they belonged to someone else. Sophie was carried past him on a stretcher, arm wrapped in towels, and he stared straight through her like she wasn't real. Vanessa said the next months were a blur of court dates and doctors. Psychiatrists explained over and over that Nathan had been in a full psychotic break, that he didn't understand reality. The judge found him not guilty by reason of insanity and ordered him to a high-security psychiatric prison with mandatory treatment, at least 6 years before they'd even consider release. Greg and Patricia sat through every hearing, stiff and silent. Sophie refused to go. She gave her testimony over video once and never watched any of it again. Sophie spent 2 weeks in the hospital. The knife had cut a tendon. They had to operate. Then she did rehab just to move her hand properly. She was 18, about to apply to college. Instead, she started years of therapy for PTSD, nightmares, panic attacks. She began sleeping with a nightlight on and wouldn't lock the bathroom door anymore. Vanessa said she still can't tolerate raised voices. Even a normal argument sends her straight back to that night. She avoids enclosed spaces with unfamiliar men. If a stranger stands too close in line, she shuts down. The family took every photo with Nathan in it and packed them into boxes in the attic. Not because they stopped caring about him, but because seeing his face felt like being punched. Greg and Patricia were stuck between two daughters who were terrified and a son they still loved. They're strict Baptists, heavy on forgiveness. Greg kept repeating, "It's illness. It's not his fault. He's our son. We can't abandon him." Patricia cried almost every night but backed him up. They started visiting Nathan once a month at the psychiatric prison, sitting across from him in a monitored room and talking about God, repentance, treatment. Vanessa and Sophie refused to go. When Greg pushed, Vanessa finally snapped in the kitchen. She yelled, "He tried to kill my sister and you still go see him. You betrayed Sophie." Greg just stood there, white-knuckled on the table edge. After that, Nathan's name basically disappeared from family conversations. I understood now why there were only 4 people in the photos. When Vanessa finished the whole story, we were sitting up in bed in the dark. She twisted the blanket in her hands for a second, then looked straight at me. "Alex, there's one more thing. Nathan's getting out in 3 months. Early release for good behavior." My stomach clenched. I took a slow breath and said, "Okay, then we plan for that. We don't just wait." Over the next days, she showed me a stack of envelopes Nathan had sent to Sophie over the last 6 months. Neat handwriting on lined paper. Every letter was some version of, "Sophie, forgive me. I know I hurt you. I take my medication every day. I go to therapy. I want to make it right. When I get out, can we talk? I miss my sister." There were 7 letters. Sophie hadn't answered any of them. The last one ended with 3 words that made the hair on my arms stand up. "See you soon." I told Vanessa we needed legal backup, not just hope. We found a lawyer who specialized in restraining orders. A tired-looking woman who took the letters, read them carefully, and listened to Vanessa describe the attack. Then she said, "He's not threatening directly, but with this history, the context is enough. I'm confident a judge will sign a temporary order." So we filed. At the hearing, an older judge with a gray mustache skimmed the file, asked Sophie a couple of soft questions, and signed the papers. 6 months. No contact with Vanessa or Sophie. He had to stay at least 500 feet away. Nathan got out on April 3rd. He was assigned a probation officer, Stephen Clark, who had been doing that job for decades. Release conditions were strict. Weekly visits with Clark, daily antipsychotic medication under a psychiatrist's supervision, group therapy twice a week. Any violation and he'd go straight back. On paper, it sounded solid. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. No calls, no letters, no sightings. We all started breathing a little easier, even though none of us said it out loud. Then, late one evening, Sophie's phone rang from an unknown number. She stared at it until it went to voicemail. When she played it on speaker, it was Nathan's voice. Calm, almost casual. "Soph, it's me. Nathan. Please hear me out. I don't want to cause pain. I just need to explain. Call me." Her hands shook so hard the phone almost fell. I took it from her, saved the voicemail and said, "This is a violation of the order. We're giving this to the police." The lawyer agreed. The probation officer agreed. Everyone said they were taking it seriously. I wanted to believe that was enough. Next day, he appeared at the cafe where Sophie worked. My younger sister Ashley came back from India a year ago as a different person. She'd spent 7 months in an ashram near Rishikesh and returned calling herself Ananda, dressed in white, talking in this calm, flat voice about awakening. Our parents, who'd watched her bounce between jobs and bad decisions, were thrilled. I lived in Chicago, worked long hours as an auditor, and only saw her every few months on Skype. What I didn't see was what she was telling our parents when I wasn't there. That whole year she'd been updating them on my supposed decline, saying I was burning out, drinking too much, sinking into depression. She used things I'd actually said about deadlines and being exhausted, but stretched them until I sounded unstable. Ashley was the one living with them, driving them to appointments, handling passwords and bills. They believed the daughter making their tea. In October, Ashley called. "Kate, I booked us a sister's weekend," she said. "Awakened Lotus Meditation Center just outside town." I'd been feeling guilty about leaving everything on her shoulders, so a weekend to reconnect and talk about our parents sounded like the right thing to do. I told my boss I'd be offline and flew home. The Awakened Lotus Center was a converted warehouse. I parked and went inside. Ashley met me at the door in white clothes, hugged me, and handed me a ceramic mug. "Drink. It's a cleansing blend we use before meditation," she said. We sat on thin cushions in a bare room while she steered every topic back to ego and attachment. After maybe 20 minutes, my head felt heavy and the room tilted. My tongue felt thick. "I feel weird," I said. Ashley smiled. "Perfect," she said. "Your mind is loosening. Let's go to meditation." She took my arm and led me down a concrete stairwell into the basement. About 20 people sat on cushions. In the center sat a man around 50 with long hair. "This is Teacher Ram," she whispered. Standing up straight felt like too much, so I let her lower me onto a cushion. He talked about freeing ourselves from material chains and letting one awakened person control family resources. Then he stood, walked to me with a clipboard, and smiled. "Your devoted sister told us about your parents' house," he said. "They're aging. They need stable care. This is a simple consent to sell and allocate funds in a way that honors service." He set the clipboard on my knees and put a pen in my hand. I tried to read, and the letters slid around. I picked out my name, my parents' address, and one clear section. From the sale, Ashley would receive 80% in recognition of years of caregiving. I would receive 20. "No," I said. My own voice sounded far away. "I'm not signing." People around us shifted closer. Teacher Ram closed his hand over mine on the pen. "Your sister gives her life to your parents while you give numbers to strangers," he said. "This is just surrender of fear. Sign." Ashley pressed against my side and took my other hand. "This is right, Kate," she whispered. "You know it. I've been there every day. I earned this." I yanked my hand back and tipped off the cushion onto the floor. Crawling was all I had, so I went for the door on my hands and knees. A hand clamped around my ankle. I kicked back hard, hit something, heard a grunt, and kept going. I dragged myself up the stairs. At the top, my jacket was still on a hook. I grabbed it, felt my car keys in the pocket, and shoved through the metal door outside. I don't remember the drive there in any clear way. It comes back in short flashes if I force it. The next solid thing is a plastic chair at the police station, my whole body shaking. Officer Garcia is leaning toward me with a notepad while I babble, and I hear my own voice, rough and too loud, saying, "They drugged me. They tried to make me sign something about my parents' house. My sister is with them." Officer Garcia took my statement and typed everything out, then told me there wasn't much he could actually do. Awakened Lotus was a registered nonprofit. There were no injuries on me, no broken doors, and I had walked in and out on my own. "You didn't sign anything," he said. "Right now, it's your word against a room full of people who say they were helping you." The only concrete step was sending me to the hospital for blood work, so there'd at least be a dated record if something was in my system. At the ER, they drew several tubes of blood and sent me back to a cheap motel. 2 days later, Garcia called. The lab had found sedatives, but at a level where they couldn't say when or how I'd taken them. "It supports your story," he said, "but it doesn't tie it to that place. I can't use it to shut them down." The next morning I called my parents. I told my mom they drugged me and tried to push house papers in front of me. She kept telling me to calm down and said, "Ashley showed us a video." My dad took the phone and said, very controlled, "Katie, you were screaming down there, waving your arms, yelling at people who were trying to help you. That's not normal." Then they texted me the file. In the video, I'm in the basement, stumbling, knocking into cushions, shoving people away while everyone around me keeps their distance with their palms up. There's no shot of Ashley handing me tea, no clipboard, no teacher ram with paperwork, just me looking like I've had a breakdown. My mom followed with a text. "Ashley has been warning us for a year that you have problems. You lied about work, about everything. We're sorry, but we're on Ashley's side. She's here taking care of us." After that, my calls went straight to voicemail. I hired a local lawyer and told him everything. The tea, the basement, the document they tried to push on me, the video, my parents suddenly siding with Ashley. He watched the clip twice, then said, "From a legal standpoint, this helps them more than you. But there's one good thing. There is no signed document, no transfer, no power of attorney. They can't touch the house without you or a court." He filed notices with the county so that any attempt to sell or refinance the property would need both our signatures. "This won't stop them from trying again," he said. "It just keeps them from doing it behind your back." About a month later, I got an email from a woman who said she'd left Awakened Lotus. She wrote that Ashley owed the center around $80,000 for courses and trainings, and that Teacher Ram had told her to either bring in new members with money and family assets, or somehow pay the debt. The woman wrote again that Ashley talked about me as the sister with the steady job, and that it sounded more like panic than hate. A few weeks later, I hired an investigator to dig into the center's money, and he tells me to be patient. 6 months have passed. Ashley still lives with my parents and spends most of her time at Awakened Lotus. My parents hardly answer me and say I'm sick and in denial. Ashley keeps sending messages like, "Come over, let's talk, I miss you." And every time my phone lights up, I have to decide whether it's my sister or the cult using her voice. About 3 years ago, I moved into this neighborhood and right away noticed the woman across the street. Melissa, maybe 28, always in baggy jeans and faded t-shirts, hair in a messy ponytail, face tired. She lived in this 2-story Victorian with peeling paint and an overgrown yard that always looked one weekend away from being reported to the city. Her blinds were usually down, but at night I'd see the blue glow of a monitor in the front room and a light in the upstairs office. She worked remotely, my mom said. I just knew she was always home. My routine back then was simple. Work, bus, home, tea, doom scroll. I'd look out my window while the kettle boiled and see Melissa slip outside to grab packages or haul in grocery bags alone, always fast, head down. I mentioned her once when I was planning a barbecue. "Maybe I'll invite the girl across the street," I told my parents. "She looks lonely." Dad didn't say anything, but my mom did that little sigh she does when she's about to tell me to back off. "Don't get involved," she said. "Complicated family situation." I asked what that meant. She lowered her voice even though we were in my kitchen with the windows shut. "Melissa's grandparents are very demanding people, old-fashioned. I heard they don't let her live her own life, control every step. But it's their family business, not ours. Be polite, that's all." After that, I started noticing more. Some evenings, the quiet on our street would just crack apart. I'd be doing dishes and hear a shrill, older woman's voice from that house, words blurred by distance but the tone pure venom, then a deeper male voice roaring back. Doors slammed. Something heavy hit a wall hard enough that my own window rattled. It would go on, stop, start again. I'd stand there holding a wet plate, staring at their dark windows, waiting to hear something that sounded like someone in real trouble. One night it got so bad I almost called the police. I picked up my phone, then put it down, then picked it up again. Mom's warning, their family business, kept looping in my head. I told myself if Melissa needed help, she'd come outside, that maybe this was just how they always were. Then I saw her a few days later taking out the trash with a yellow bruise under one eye, makeup half smeared over it. She noticed me looking, gave this quick, tight smile like she was apologizing for existing, and hurried back inside. I didn't call. I still feel sick about that. This January, something changed overnight. I came home and saw a woman on the Hutchinson porch with a neat short bob, glossy and styled, wearing new jeans and a fitted leather jacket. For a second, I honestly thought they had a visitor. Then she waved and I realized it was Melissa. She looked normal. Not happier exactly, but lighter. She started saying hi to people walking dogs, even laughed once at something Mr. Patel said about the weather. About a week later, she knocked on my door holding a plastic container of cupcakes. "Hey, I'm Melissa from across the street," she said, like we hadn't been watching each other for years. "I just wanted to apologize for being a hermit and, for any noise my family made." We ended up sitting in my living room with coffee and store-bought cupcakes that tasted like pure sugar. She joked that she'd finally decided to adult and fix the place up. Renovation plans poured out of her. New kitchen, new bathroom, paint, maybe even a porch swing. At some point I asked where the Hutchinsons were. I realized I hadn't seen their car or the old man in his yard chair in weeks. Melissa took a sip of coffee and said very calmly, "They're at Cedar Grove Nursing Home. Doctors think my grandpa's having heart problems. They're doing tests. It's easier if they're there for a few weeks." She sounded almost matter-of-fact, but there was this softness in her shoulders I'd never seen before. I told her I hoped they'd be okay, and she nodded, said, "Yeah, they're where they need to be," and then went right back to talking about backsplash tile. When she left, she hugged the cupcake container to her chest like a shield and said, "Come over next time. I'll show you the disaster zone." We met for coffee twice more in February at her place. Inside, the house looked like a renovation show freeze frame. Old heavy furniture shoved into corners, plastic sheeting taped over doorways, stacks of tile and wallpaper catalogs everywhere. The smell of paint and solvent hit you as soon as you walked in. She said she was sanding the floors and stripping wallpaper herself to save money. All the windows were cracked open even though it was freezing. When I shivered and joked about heating bills, she waved it off. "If I don't air it out, I'll pass out," she said. In early March, people started talking about a smell on our street. At first, it was just, "Do you smell that?" in the neighborhood chat. Someone said maybe the dumpster behind the strip mall needed to be emptied, but it kept getting worse, especially near the Hutchinson house. Walking past, it hit like rotten meat mixed with something chemical that burned your nose. Mrs. Chen next door said it was making her nauseous. "I think it's gas," she told us one morning, arms folded tight. "I'm calling the gas company. If there's a leak, we're all in danger." The gas guys came that afternoon with a truck and little handheld detectors. A few of us watched from our porches, trying not to look like we were watching. Melissa stood on her porch in an oversized hoodie, arms wrapped around herself, eyes on the driveway. One worker walked slowly around the house, holding the detector near the foundation vents and the small basement windows. When he reached the one on the side, the device started screeching. Even from across the street, I saw him jerk back. Within minutes, a fire truck pulled up. Firefighters in gear went around the back with tools. We couldn't see the door from where we were, but we heard the crack and splinter of wood and metal as they broke down the basement door per protocol and forced their way inside. The crowd on the sidewalk went quiet. Neighbors edged closer to the property line, straining to see. After a short, heavy pause, one firefighter appeared in the doorway and shouted for the others. More of them went down into the basement, and then word started rippling from the backyard to the front, from person to person, low and shocked. They had found Walter and Dorothy Hutchinson lying on an old couch in the basement, bodies already in an advanced state of decomposition. Police put yellow tape around the house and took Melissa away in handcuffs while the whole street watched from porches. I stood on my steps shaking so hard I had to grip the railing, thinking that 2 weeks earlier I had sat in her living room drinking coffee while her grandparents were already dead underneath us. She did not fight or yell, just stared at the driveway while they walked her to the car, hair in her face, wrists pulled back, neighbors whispering her name behind their hands. Later that afternoon, the sirens left, and one patrol car stayed. Detective Harris spoke to the local news on the sidewalk. He said it looked like carbon monoxide poisoning from an old gas heater in the basement, no sign of an intruder, and that Ms. Hutchinson was cooperating with the investigation. Bits of what she told them started coming back through neighbors who had cousins at the station. Melissa said she did not know anything was wrong with the heater. She said she had asked her grandparents to sleep in the basement because exterminators were treating the upstairs for insects, and she wanted to keep them away from chemicals. According to the story that went around, she even claimed she locked the basement door from the outside so the fumes would not seep down and poison them. She told police it was for their safety, that she thought the door would keep the upstairs treatment sealed off from the lower level. Nobody said much out loud, but people traded looks when that part got passed around. If you are worried about fumes, you do not lock people in a room with an ancient gas heater. A week later, my dad heard from an officer that forensics had found every basement vent taped over from the inside, the heater turned to maximum, and the basement door secured with a padlock on the outside. After the autopsy, everything shifted into legal language. We started seeing Melissa's name in the news crawl at night. Her lawyer held a short press conference on the courthouse steps and called it a tragic, negligent accident. He said his client had devoted years to caring for her elderly grandparents, that she only wanted to protect them from insect poisons upstairs, and did not understand how dangerous the old heater in the basement really was. The prosecutor did not agree. Within a month, the county filed 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter. At a community meeting, an assistant prosecutor explained they had proof Melissa knew the heater was faulty, that it had been reported as leaking and never fixed. They had messages where she complained about years of control and verbal abuse, and paperwork from a lawyer showing the house would go to her after her grandparents died. Their theory was that she finally decided to speed things up. Cold January weather slowed the decomposition, they said, so the bodies did not smell at first. By the time the odor grew stronger, she already had a story ready. She opened every window and told everyone she was airing out paint and solvent from renovation prep, and she invited neighbors over for coffee so the house would look busy and normal. Because of the Slayer rule, they said, she could not inherit the place if she was convicted, so the court froze the property until trial in October. Melissa got out on bail and went to live with her sister in Ohio. I was listed as a witness about those coffees. At night, I dream about opening that basement door, and I wake up sick knowing I drank coffee upstairs while those bodies lay below me. I was looking for a stapler when I found the tickets in my father's desk drawer. 3 bus tickets to Montana, dated 5 days out, names listed, my parents and my 19-year-old brother Ethan. The word family was written in my dad's blocky handwriting and underlined twice in red pen. We never took family trips, not real ones, especially not after Ethan came out 2 months ago. That's when our house basically turned into a silent battlefield between my fanatic father and my gay little brother. I'd come back from Germany 3 weeks earlier and walked into a different house. Ethan looking like a ghost. Thinner, quiet, hunched over his phone, doing anything he could to avoid our father's gaze. Dad, a former Marine and self-appointed church elder, took Ethan coming out like it was a personal insult from God delivered straight to his living room. I tried talking to him adult to adult, sat across from him at the kitchen table and said we needed to figure this out like normal people. And he exploded, slammed his fist down, sprayed coffee, threatened to write us both out of his will and throw us out of the house. Mom cried in the corner, and then, the next morning, she still supported him. Quietly slid a Bible toward Ethan with Leviticus bookmarked, and read verses at breakfast like she was reading the weather. Now I was alone in their room, holding these tickets, and I felt this cold knot in my stomach that wouldn't move. Something was wrong, monstrously wrong, and I suddenly knew whatever Dad was planning, it wasn't a vacation. I put the tickets back exactly how I'd found them, closed the drawer, and walked out before my hands started shaking too hard. For the next few days, the house felt even tighter. Dad kept using that word family in this weird way, like he was testing it every time he said it. He'd stop in Ethan's doorway, ask him if he was ready for some family time soon, ask me if I was glad to be back with the family where I belong. Ethan just nodded and stared at his desk. He'd started sleeping with his door locked. I noticed because Dad tried the handle twice one night and muttered something about disrespect. Mom kept talking about fresh air and a change of scenery at dinner, as if we ever did spontaneous nature trips. I tried to corner Ethan once, asked, "Did Dad say anything to you about a trip?" He shrugged, eyes red, and said, "Just something about the mountains. He won't talk to me. He just talks at me." The way he said mountains made the knot in my stomach twist again. Dad started spending more time in his study with the door half closed, talking on the phone in that fake, calm voice he used with church people. I didn't know what yet, but I knew those tickets were the center of it. Around midnight 2 days later, I heard my father's voice from his study. The door was cracked open and the light was on. He thought everyone was asleep. I padded down the hallway and stopped before the crack, pressing myself against the wall so I could hear him without seeing him. "Yes, he'll go. I'm not asking permission. I'm his father," he was saying. "I'll tell him we're going to the mountains, family retreat, pray together." My heart started pounding so loud I thought he'd hear it in the hallway. There was a pause, papers rustling. "How long does it usually take? 6 months? Good." Another pause, his voice getting quieter and harder. "Do you have physical methods there? I understand. Do whatever's necessary. He needs to come back normal, or not come back at all." My hand flew up over my mouth and I felt my legs go loose. I backed away from the door and almost ran into the hall table, then stumbled to my room and shut my door, locked it, leaned against it while my brain tried to catch up with what I just heard. For 3 straight hours, I sat on my bed with my laptop open, typing and deleting and retyping search phrases. Conversion Camp Montana. Christian Camp Restore Sexuality. LGBT Conversion Retreat Bus from Denver. Restore Path Ministries came up again and again, a closed discipleship camp in the mountains with no phones, no internet, no visitors, minimum stay 6 months. On their website, everything looked clean and smiling and beige, boys in matching shirts with Bibles in their laps. But the reviews on LGBT forums were like reading people scream. My brother came back broken. My daughter tried to kill herself the week after. They use starvation, isolation, beatings, prayer circles, where they scream at you for hours. 3 suicides in 5 years that commenters knew about. 2 kids who ended up in psych wards. There were rumors of kids who just never came back to their families at all. I stared at my laptop screen until the letters blurred, then looked up at the dark wall and understood very clearly that I had 5 days to get my brother out. I acted fast because there was no one else who was going to. The next morning, I dug my old iPhone out of a box in my closet, charged it, turned on the voice recorder, and that afternoon, I slipped into Dad's study while he was in the shower and hid the phone under a stack of church newspapers on his desk. Over the next 2 days, I recorded 4 conversations. One with the camp coordinator, one with the pastor who'd recommended the place, 2 with Mom when she thought no one was listening. Calm voices saying insane things. If he resists, we'll drag him by force. The Lord will forgive any methods. Hearing my own mother murmur, "Amen," to that on tape made me sick. In between planting the phone and grabbing it to recharge it when they went out, I went to the bank and withdrew $8,000 from my savings account. Every euro I'd turned into dollars after 3 years of scraping by in Germany. While my parents were at church, I used the spare key to their bedroom, guessed the safe code from Dad's favorite Bible verse, and took Ethan's documents: birth certificate, social security card, passport, medical records. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit on their bed for a second just to breathe. That evening I called my great-aunt Margot in San Francisco, the relative Dad only ever mentioned as a warning. She'd left the church 40 years ago, never married, lived alone with her cats somewhere in the city. In Dad's version, she was basically the devil. I hadn't talked to her in years, but I still had her number saved from when she sent me money for my plane ticket to Germany. When she picked up, I didn't even say hello, just, "Margot, I need help. Urgently. It's about Ethan." There was the tiniest pause, then she said, very steady, "Come." That was it. No lecture, no questions, just that one word. I hung up, went to the pharmacy, bought cough syrup and a thermometer, then went home and sat Ethan down on my bed and showed him how to fake a fever. Hot water on the forehead right before Mom walked in. Cough syrup for the glazed eyes and the cough, a couple of practiced shivers. The day before the trip, Ethan came down with a very dramatic flu. He lay on the couch burning up on schedule while Dad paced, furious, arguing with Mom about whether they could still go. He couldn't drag a sick kid onto a bus without raising suspicion, and he knew it. I watched that fight from the hallway and felt, for the first time, like I had leverage. That night, when the house finally went quiet, I closed Ethan's bedroom door, sat on the edge of his bed, and told him everything I'd heard and done. He went pale, started shaking, but he listened to every word and didn't interrupt. When I finished, his eyes were wet, but he nodded once, slowly, swallowed hard, and whispered, "What do we do?" At 2 in the morning, we climbed out my first-floor bedroom window. We had 2 backpacks, $8,000 in cash, and our phones switched off. We moved along the side of the house, cut through the neighbor's yard, and only when we reached the street did I breathe. I'd ordered a taxi to the corner. The driver glanced at us once, 2 adults with bags, and said nothing. At the station, we bought bus tickets to San Francisco. The bus left at 4:47. We waited in chairs, Ethan's hand in mine, his leg shaking so hard the seat clicked. I told him we were leaving, that this was the worst part, but he just stared at the floor. On the bus, he finally broke. He turned to the window and cried quietly, shoulders shaking. I kept my hand on his arm and pretended to look past him. I had no speech ready. Nothing I thought of sounded real. About 6 hours in, I forced myself to turn my phone on. The screen filled with missed calls and voicemails from Dad. I put in headphones and played the first one. "You stole my son," he said. "I will find you. You will regret this." His voice shook with a rage I had never heard. I deleted every message before Ethan could see the screen. Margot met us at the San Francisco station, leaning on a rail with a coffee cup. Gray hair in a knot, big glasses, but her hug was steady. She introduced herself to Ethan like this was a normal visit and drove us home. In the car, she asked what Dad had planned, so I told her about the tickets, the late calls, the camp. She listened, then said, "I did family law for 30 years. Ethan's 19. Your father has no legal power over him." That sounded final, but I knew Dad would not drop it. That night the email started. Bible verses turned into threats, long messages about obedience and filth. We blocked one address, and he opened another. The emails kept coming about hell, obedience, and betrayal. He called Margot a whore and kidnapper, and twice drove to her street to shout until neighbors called the police. After the second time, Margot laid the printed emails on her table and said we were getting a restraining order. At court, the judge skimmed them, stopped at the line where Dad wrote that Ethan would be better off dead than living in sin, and signed. A week later, Dad showed up at the cafe where I worked. My manager called the police, showed them the order, and they arrested him in the parking lot. He got 30 days probation and a fine. Not long after, Mom called from a blocked number, said I'd destroyed the family and that God would punish me, then hung up. I sent Ethan money for 6 months so he could stay in Margot's room, eat, and buy a bus pass. He got a job as a bartender and started taking evening classes at the community college. Some nights he woke up in a sweat and paced. I heard him, but didn't ask what he was seeing. A year has passed since that night we ran. Ethan smiles now, not all the time, but honestly, especially when he talks about school or the regulars at the bar. He has a boyfriend, a quiet guy who treats him gently and always checks if Ethan is okay. But every time I see a bus to Montana, my stomach turns. I think about those 3 tickets and the 5 days between finding them and getting Ethan out. 5 days between my brother and that camp, and I still count them sometimes to make sure we really made it in time. During the summer of 2013, my dad died of lung cancer at 62, smoked since he was 16. After the funeral, I moved into my grandparents' house because somebody had to stay with them, and there was no one left but me. I was 24, a nurse at a local clinic, and I switched to day shifts so I could be home evenings to cook, clean, line up their pills, argue with Grandpa about salt, remind Grandma to check her blood sugar. It wasn't fun, but it felt like the only thing that still made sense. Life settled into a routine. They were 84 and 87, stubborn and proud, still telling neighbors they were managing just fine. I slept in my dad's old room and tried not to look at his jacket hanging on the closet door. We'd eat dinner, watch whatever game show Grandma liked, and then I'd wipe the counters while she asked when I was going to start my own family. I could live with that. What I didn't expect was Uncle Ray suddenly acting like we were his project. Ray is my dad's younger brother, the successful one. He'd moved out of state years ago and turned into this polished businessman we mostly saw on Christmas cards. A month after the funeral, he called to see how things were. He was gentle on the phone, told me, "If you need anything, Em, seriously, I've got you. Your dad would want me to help." He even hinted at financial support if I got overwhelmed. I actually cried after we hung up, from relief that someone else in the family gave a damn. Then Thanksgiving came. I was in the hallway taking Grandma's coat when the door opened, and Ray walked in with his perfect family behind him, Monica, and their two college-age sons dragging in a suitcase and shiny bags. Ray hugged Grandma, hugged me, told me I looked tired but strong. While everyone took off their shoes, I saw his eyes moving around the house. Not in a nostalgic way. He scanned the staircase, the living room, the dining room, the pictures on the wall. He looked exactly like some of the relatives I'd seen at the hospital when they whispered about how much the house might go for. In that second, I realized he wasn't just visiting. He was evaluating. Ray took a week off work to help my niece since she's handling the care alone. That's how he sold it to Grandma, loud enough that I could hear from the kitchen. On the surface, it sounded nice. An extra driver for appointments. Someone to sit with Grandpa if my shift ran over. But from the first morning, I could feel him edging into my place. At breakfast, he made a joke that wasn't really a joke. You know, Dad at your age already bought his first house, and you're still renting an apartment. Oh, sorry. You live with Grandma now. I totally forgot. He laughed, kissed Grandma's hand like he was charming her in a movie. Grandma winced a little, then looked at me and said, "You do work too much, dear." By lunch, he'd found problems. He ran his finger along the shelf in the living room, showed Grandma the faint line in the dust and said, "Emma, there's dust here. You know Grandma has allergies? You're not taking care of the house at all." I had cleaned that room 2 days before, but it didn't matter. Grandma immediately started apologizing to him and wiping the shelf, and somehow I ended up saying sorry too. In the evenings, he pulled out the family album and performed for Grandma. Dad would have wanted Emma to get married, have kids, continue the family line, not waste her youth working at a hospital. He told me that before he died. Did you know? I knew my dad had never said that to me. Grandma, though, nodded without hesitation. "Ray's right, dear. Your dad really did worry about your future." Ray watched my reaction more than he watched her, like he was tracking what landed and what didn't. By day 2, it was constant little digs. If I brought home takeout because my shift ran late, he sighed to Grandma about how hard it is to manage a household when you work all the time. If I reminded Grandpa not to climb on a chair, Ray told him, "Back in my day, your daughter would listen to her father. Kids now think they know better." He said everything calmly, lightly, with a smile, but the effect was heavy. I could feel Grandma shifting from "Emma is taking care of us" to poor Ray, having to fix what Emma can't handle, one comment at a time. On the 3rd day, I came home from work still in my scrubs and heard drawers opening upstairs. Grandma never went into my dad's room. After the funeral, she'd closed the door and said, "Let it stay just like he left it." I walked up and found Ray in the middle of that room with cardboard boxes spread across the bed. The closet doors were open, dresser drawers half empty. He was wrapping the Rolex Grandpa had given Dad for his 40th birthday in a towel. In one box, I saw Dad's Pink Floyd vinyls stacked neatly. In another, his old leather jacket and his military medals. "What are you doing?" I asked. My voice sounded flat even to me. Ray turned with a smooth smile. "Grandma let me take something to remember my brother. Brother should have something from brother, right? You understand." It felt like a line he'd practiced in the mirror. I didn't argue with him. Instead, I turned around and went straight downstairs. Grandma was in the kitchen with Monica, both of them drinking tea, a plate of cookies between them. "Did you really tell Ray he could take Dad's things?" I asked. Grandma nodded right away. "Of course, dear. Ray misses his brother so much. He needs these things to remember." Monica stared at her cup, not saying a word. I went back upstairs and looked at the boxes again. There were things worth thousands of dollars, things that should have gone to me, the only daughter. By the end of that week, Grandma was repeating Ray's phrases almost word for word. At breakfast, she'd sigh. "You're too busy with work. You don't have time for us." If I opened my laptop after dinner, she'd shake her head and say, "If you really tried, you could find a husband." Other girls your age already have families. When Ray stopped by one evening with store cake, she smiled at him and said, "Ray cares so much about us. Why can't you be the same?" Then looked guilty, like she'd surprised herself in front of me at the table. After he drove back to Texas, he didn't stop. He just moved to the phone. Every evening around 8 he called, and Grandma would sit on her bed with the door cracked, talking in that soft, agreeing tone she uses when she wants harmony. I'd hear, "Yes, Ray, you're right. I do worry about Emma." Or, "Yes, I will talk to her about her future." One night she put him on speaker so she could fold towels, and I heard him as clearly as if he were standing in the hallway. It felt wrong, so I stayed very still listening. Ray started with small talk about her joints and Grandpa's blood pressure, then slid right into it. "Mom, maybe you should move to me in Texas. I have a big house. Monica will care for you. We have warm weather and good doctors. You'd love it here." He barely paused before adding, "And you can sell the Portland house. The money will go toward your care here, for medicine, maybe a nurse later." Grandma was quiet so long I thought the call dropped. Then she said, very slowly, that it sounded practical and she would think about it for a while. I'd listened to that whole conversation on speakerphone, pretending to wipe the counter, and finally everything clicked. He wasn't talking about her comfort. He was lining up a sale. Lure Grandma out, make her sell, then control whatever came from the house. Even I know roughly what places on our street are worth. This one could sell for around $600,000. In the will, that money goes to me when Grandma dies. If she sells while she's alive and moves to him, it all funnels straight into his hands instead, and I could see him counting it already inside. That night, after she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with the light still on. Grandpa shuffled in for water, saw my face, and didn't even pretend everything was fine. He lowered himself into the chair and said quietly, "I'm on your side, Emma. I see what Ray's doing, but I can't fight with your grandma. Doctor said no stress." He looked miserable saying it. That was when I realized nobody was coming to fix this for me, so I had to start protecting her myself. The only thing I could think of was gathering proof first. So I downloaded a voice recorder app on my phone and started recording every call I could, hitting the button whenever his name popped up on the screen in Grandma's room. I saved the files with dates, Googled lawyers on my lunch break, read about elder abuse and undue influence until my eyes hurt. Ray calls every day now, repeating the same points, slowly separating her from me. Last week he said he's coming for Christmas to continue the conversation. I'm honestly terrified he'll leave with her signature and the last piece of my dad's life and have no backup.